How's it going, everybody? So we have a fun review today as we're talking the Garfield movie. As somebody that grew up in the 90s, I love me some Garfield. I read so many of the books that compiled the comic book strips. Not only that, but one of my favorite shows growing up was the reruns of Garfield and Friends. All of that kind of shaped my personality growing up, while also making me very fond of cats, as I am kind of a cat person. For example, here's one of my cats. He's actually the one that's probably closest to Garfield. After Garfield's unexpected reunion with his long-lost father, Vic, him and his canine friend Odie are forced from their perfectly pampered lives to join Vic on a risky heist. For as much as I adore Garfield as a character, I think it's safe to say when it comes to these big screen adaptations, they've never managed to crack the formula perfectly. I enjoyed Bill Murray's performance as Garfield, but the movies surrounding the character were not well done. It is actually quite difficult to create an entire film centered around a character like Garfield that captures the right tone for fans of the character and just general audiences. The Garfield movie, at least currently, is the best of all of these attempts, managing to weave together a simple yet enjoyable adventure for Garfield, which drums up a decent amount of fun. I do like how they play up Garfield in the context of this story, while also managing to try and bring an emotional element to Garfield's journey, having him try and attempt to rekindle this relationship between him and his father across this adventure, who he believes, for all intents and purposes, abandoned him at a young age. Out of everything in the Garfield movie, that is the element that I think is the strongest, and I wish that it delved into a lot more. The relationship between Garfield and his father, Vic. To me, it was the most interesting element going on, because clearly Garfield isn't too fond of his father, feeling that he was abandoned, which were shown through glimpses into Garfield's past through these various surprisingly emotional flashbacks. Yet amongst everything going on with this adventure with Garfield, Odie, and Vic, those sequences of them together were the parts where I thought the film was the strongest, focused around Garfield and Vic building that trust up again, understanding what happened between them all those years ago, where he inevitably ended up with John in the end. Plus, it just helped that Chris Pratt and Samuel L. Jackson had great chemistry with one another. Thankfully, this time around, when we're doing a Garfield film, we're not going for the whole live-action CGI hybrid approach, which was still very odd looking back in retrospect, choosing now to just go forward with straight animation. In this instance, I do like the animation overall for the Garfield movie. I think it does add a nice visual flair to many of the various sequences of the film. There are a lot of things that happen to Garfield, Vic, and Odie across this adventure, coupled with some of the humor I think lands a lot better. Because of the animation they employ here, they can go for the bigger, exaggerated gags. You know, some of the staples for Garfield. Garfield's extreme love for lasagna, battling drones, eating an entire supply of a restaurant's food. Speaking more on Garfield, for as much flack as Chris Pratt gets for voicing all these different characters, Mario, now Garfield, some of that criticism is understandable. I do think for the most part he did a pretty solid job voicing Garfield in the film. It's nothing mind-blowing or anything. He isn't even probably top 3 in the voicing Garfield category. In my opinion, nobody's gonna top Lorenzo Music voicing the character, but even Bill Murray and Frank Welker I think are far superior when it comes to voicing the character. Still, however, I think he brought a good amount of charm and humor to the usual personality that we know and love about Garfield, and he did make me laugh a couple times throughout the film. A large portion of the humor for the Garfield movie is catered for a much younger demographic, so adults might be a little bit more wary about the humor. Some of the jokes can come across a little bit cringy in this, but I get I'm not the target audience anymore. There's a jarring amount of social media references, and the worst of all, which I think is kind of frustrating just in general, mostly because you're an adult and you notice all this stuff, it is just the egregious amount of product placements throughout the movie, most of which are thrown into the movie for no reason at all, which I guess makes sense because that kind of is a thing that Sony does with these movies. You see it in a lot of Sony films, the product placements everywhere. Much like we've seen in a lot of these other Garfield movies over the years, it is a similar problem once again in the Garfield movie, is that they don't know necessarily what to do with Garfield as a character. It's difficult to create an entire story around a character like Garfield whose main priority is overeating, being lazy, hating Mondays, and every now and then manipulating somebody to get what he wants. Yet the majority of the time, they have to put him on these big, grand adventures to sell a movie. So normally we end up with these very basic, generic stories, and that is the case once again with the Garfield movie. Just because it's generic doesn't exactly mean that it's awful by any means. However, this type of story is one that we've seen beaten to death over the years across many different films. This time around, it has a Garfield skin over top of the heist, adventure, rekindling relationship story. Even the villain of the film, who's voiced by the delightful Hannah Waddingham, everything around her character is very stereotypical. Essentially, from the moment that she enters and they go on the adventure, you know exactly where this story is going to end up by the end. Speaking of Hannah Waddingham, though, I do think it's kind of fun that she is the villain of the film and one of her henchmen is voiced by Brett Goldstein. So in a way, it almost is kind of like a Ted Lasso reunion. I also kind of wish that this movie wasn't kind of just all over the place tonally. There are a lot of jokes and emotional moments that I think would have hit harder if they just let them breathe. There will be this big big emotional sequence that tries to pull on your heartstrings, then immediately following it up with a silly joke that kind of just ruins the whole mood. Overall, I don't think the Garfield movie is going to end up being one of the best animated movies of the year or anything. However, there is a serviceable amount of fun here thrown in throughout that I think kids are more so going to enjoy than adults. It'll be fascinating to see how modern audiences feel about a movie like this. It's definitely not a great movie by any means. There are a fair amount of flaws here, so it's very much a mixed experience. As a big Garfield fan, I think we still are kind of trying to find that perfect story we haven't seen yet between the Bill Murray films and now this one, but maybe with a few tweaks, if they ever do a sequel to this version, it could end up being a pretty solid entry. But now for my thoughts on the Garfield movie, make sure you share your thoughts down below once you get a chance to check out the film. Did you like the film? Did you not like the film? As a Garfield fan, are you excited for more stuff in this universe? Do you want a sequel to this? Or are you good and you don't want a follow-up to this starring Chris Pratt? Either way, make sure you share your thoughts down below because fun this is that conversation with you guys in the comments section. Thank you guys, as always, checking out videos. I always do appreciate it. Make sure you like on the video and also subscribe to the channel to update reviews, reactions, unboxings, and more. Till next time, see you guys later.